Sasha, hello. I will switch.
Oh, I hope that the techniques will be working.
Yes.
So can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Hello and greetings to Germany. Dr. Aleksandar JOVANOVIĆ is part of European Virtual Institute for Integral Risk Management and is also scientific manager in EU-VRi project, which dealing with critical infrastructure, especially industrial sites. And Sasha, I'm really glad that we have you with us and that you will present your excellent presentation. So please be my guest.
Thank you very much. Big greetings to the whole audience and a lot of appreciation for this invitation. It's a real pleasure talking to more than 100 participants. I was really surprised to see how big the audience is. Congratulations to the organizer. Congratulations to you personally. And just a sort of a hint that the presentation which is coming is a sort of extension of that what has been done and said in many of the preceding presentations. I had the pleasure to hear some of them. And we are essentially extending a little bit the picture. We are extending the focus. And what we are talking about, I'm just trying now to see how can I get the next slide. I hope that it's going to be the case. Yes, we will be talking about how to assess resilience as a, as a feature which is so essential not only for critical infrastructure, but also to critical functions of these infrastructures. And if we just take a quick reminder of the basic, so to say, basic concept of resilience on the next slide, we will see that the concept is very simple. You essentially have something which looks like an attack, like an adverse event, like a problem which is happening, threat which is materializing from the external or internal environment, and this threat, this event leads to a disturbance in the system. The overall system says after that you should be in a position to assess. That's what ISO 22300 is also saying, that you should be able to assess the ability to absorb and adapt to this changing environment. Essentially, this is nothing else but the risk materializing, which leads to a disorder, and you would like to represent this. Then you take, and I have deliberately taken on the right side a sort of handmade drawing, because it's very easy on a diagram like this to imagine what happens on the horizontal axis. It's actually time. The time which you use to plan, to prepare, to absorb when the event happens, to recover after that, adapt after that. But what is on the top side of the diagram, what is on the system functionality side, it is not so easy to do. So if you want to go, as you can see on the next slide, we are going to have it, I hope. Next slide. I'm just trying to give a signal to the, for whatever reason it doesn't work. So we want to see what happens in each of these phases. And what happens in each of these phases is important, because at the end of the event, one can easily have a situation that on a long term, the same event under different circumstances can lead to very different outcomes. And in all this, what we understand and do today on the cybersecurity, we are obviously very much focused on the event itself and much less focused on what happens afterwards. What is going to be the final outcome, say, after a day, after a week, or after a year? And we see it very well in this this event of a global pandemics nowadays or similar. And we essentially have numbers around which are floating back and forth, but we essentially don't know what these numbers mean. Why? Because there is no common agreement of what these numbers are meaning. And as shown on the next slide, please, we will need these numbers. Can I have the next slide, please? Hello? Hello? Yep, thank you. Well, one back, please. So we will need these, and one more back, please. We will need these slides in order to get some numbers which are going to be calculated based on the behavior of the system. So if we want to know if we have a success or failure, we will have to calculate some of these, for instance, areas under the curves to check if we are in the right region or not, and to see how we are going to manage the crisis which is following the event in the due course. So that's what the next slide is showing. So I hope I'm going to get that one. Yes, so that is the curve which you have seen very often now without this resilience related explanation, but you have seen flattening the curve, you have heard it, and that is one of the strategies which can lead us to the solution, which at the end of the day and the analysis, as on the next slide, can, for critical infrastructures, tell us, can I have the next slide, please? Which can, in an example which was analyzed in one of our European projects, which can tell us in a case of a complex threat in which, for instance, water, energy, and transportation infrastructures, which of these has failed or succeeded to behave as wanted. What you see on the slide is a pink thick line, which is saying that's something which we can accept in such kind of an event we can live with. And you see that energy and water were largely behaving as expected, but for instance, that in a particular case, transportation network was not working. The catch here is how to calculate this and how to calculate it on the long term. And that is especially difficult, as we can see on the next slide. If we are talking about what is nowadays very often called X threat, which are new, emerging, unknown, multiple, hybrid, you name it, events in which multiple critical infrastructure, multiple critical functions are involved and interacting to each other. It is in these cases, very often very difficult to follow the old-fashioned way based on tabletop exercises. And in such a case, you actually have to find something which will help you go more in depth. And that is what has been largely recognized. So if you look what is, for instance, US doing at this moment, we can see it on the next slide. Next slide. Yes, thank you very much. We see that the emphasis is very much on looking at the critical functions above all. So it is not so important what happens on a single infrastructure, but it's important what happens in the whole system. So including the functional decomposition of the whole system, looking at sub-functions, then transposing this into systems, subsystems, and their components. And that's where the emphasis is. And the emphasis is, of course, on looking at the possibilities, how to represent these things in a more quantitative way. And if we look now at this quantitative way, we can find it largely, next slide please, we can find it very much in the InfraStress project, which is a project where we have a pleasure to work together and collaborate with to collaborate with ICS. Can I have the next slide, please? And the next one right off, where we do this by means of indicators, and the same figure which you have seen on the preceding slide, you can then try to get as a thing which we call resilience level, as a composite index based on a large number of different indicators. So that is shown on the next slide, please, on which you see that you can compose such an indicator, for instance, for the three main dimensions of the resilience, namely preparedness, robustness, and recovery and adaptation facility, over defined 5 phases of the resilience cycle. And then for each of these more or less composite indicators, you get the values, be it from the measure values, from values which you are acquiring from experts, or the values which you are, for instance, getting out of a big data analysis. And when you start doing this in depth, so to say, you will see, as you can see on the next slide, that the picture becomes more complicated, and you can then, by modeling probably through similar techniques as those shown by Sasho, you can see how the interdependencies between different sectors in different countries, in different areas, and especially these examples which I am bringing here are from the industry sectors, have an increase in their complexity in last years. It is not only that they have an increased complexity. It's also that our possibility to go more in detail with this modeling has also improved. So when you start putting these indicators at work, you get something which is shown on the next slide, please, where you can provide different layers of physical interdependencies, something which we have very intensively looked at in our pilot case studies in infrastructure project, looking also at geographic interdependencies, and building the sort of a dynamic resilience indicators which can then support changes in the time. Applying the same principle practically, but you can see on the next slide, and there we will need a lot of pressing. For health infrastructure in Austria, we have taken 120 hospitals in Austria, 122 maybe or so, and then looked also at supporting infrastructures like pharmacies, doctors, and similar. And then please press return button again. Then got a picture of what is the resilience level under the call it routine scenarios. So we have seen who is better prepared, who can better adapt, who can better react, and the overall picture, as you may imagine, in the colors very much green and yellow, was very satisfactory. When before the outbreak of Corona, we have analyzed some of extreme events. Please press the next button, and got the same picture for the one more, please, and got the same picture for such an extreme scenario. The picture was very difficult. Only few of the regions in Austria were able to say that they can cope successfully with these scenarios too. And if we press more, one more, yeah, and one more, please, then we will see that this was all made by the technique which is involving all the or some of the aspects mentioned in the previous presentation, like looking at AI, and in this particular case there was a lot of agent-based modeling, saying what happens when what happens. So altogether, these were pictures which were largely used also in the management of the crisis in Austria in last half a year. But what the people actually want to look like is not any sort of complex system or complex picture in front of them, but they rather want to see, as you can see it on the next slide, a sort of next slide, please. You can see the overall behavior of single infrastructures in such a case when you see who is recovering faster and who is lagging behind. So in infrastress project on the next slide, we have tried to apply these concepts and develop them further. And next slide was good. Thank you very much. So, and assess the resilience of European critical infrastructures by means of indicators, where, of course, we are still facing quite a number of difficulties and things which have to be done. So, next slide, please. So, these needs, these wishes are essentially resulting from the situation which we have. And if you press for the next slide and see what do we have at the moment, you will see that it's a sort of a jungle. You just take the European research, you avoid national research, and you find almost 60,000 security-related projects, 40 of them related also or in parallel to safety, resilience, and other terms, infrastructures also mentioned thousands of times. Do we need so many frameworks? Do we need so many solutions which are not applied or applied in, so to say, just a provisional, temporary way? It is something to look at in the future. But we will, of course, have to do a sort of a reassessment of these things. And one small reassessment and small proposal of what to do in the future in infrastress project we have done on our side. So the first proposal which we have made, looking at all these proposals, and again, on the next slide, as you can see, we have analyzed some of these projects. Please go to the next slide. Yep. So we have taken only a small, joking, subsample, which was a little bit less than 1,000 projects, and look what they were in this area, of course. And we were saying what they were overlapping, where do we have the overlaps, where do we have some gaps, and so on. And the result of this analysis, apart from this one, which is web semantics based one, is presented on the next slide, where you can see. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. That most of these projects are essentially focusing on the absorb and response phase. Very few of them are going in a structured way into the phase of understanding risk, anticipating in terms of elaborated and dynamic scenarios, and even less is the adapt and transformation phase of a concern. Everybody is saying we will take it into account, but at the end of the day, it's not the case. So what we are suggesting, it's on the next slide, we suggest that this current focus is extended. And that's a result which we are going to present and propose not only to the European Commission, but also to the related community of users in this area. And this extension should by all means cover the earlier phases, the pre-phases, call it like this, of resilience cycle, and the adapt and transformation phase, because if we keep on analyzing, all our events, if we continue staring at our dashboards and screens and so on, and be amazed with nice visualizations, which we can, of course, make very useful, we are going to have a sort of unequal or unequilibrated situation in the future. This is what has been recognized not only by us, next slide please, but also by the big organizations which are seeing that this is a problem in critical infrastructure. Here you have the World Economic Forum diagram from this year, and you see how perfectly it matches the goals of the project. So our solution in infrastress, shown on the next slide, is next slide please, is showing a complex system behind this, and the red part is that what most of the presentations, at least so far, probably the continuing one at this meeting, are going to be looking at situational awareness. What can we do with that? What is threatening our systems from inside, from outside, and so on. But what we are saying, let's look what happens afterwards. Let's look what can be the root cause of this situation which we are looking at. And once when we are doing this, then we can for sure support better and optimize the decision which is made, because then it is not going to be just the reaction of something which is at this moment happening around, but it is going to be able to say that one or the other way, or one or the other option available in the reaction time can then lead to something which is bringing us closer to an optimal solution. And this is what we have done on the next slide. So please press the next slide and press the return button once. So when we make our list of indicators and put them into the system, press the button please, then we will get once more, then we will get a picture which is in so to say in form of diagrams, are going to tell us where we are, what is good, what is bad, and which we can reasonably well visualize. Please, one more press, which can visualize the behavior of the system. This is a deliberately taken example from the project, which is geographically located in Slovenia, and which tells if how the event in one part of the system is propagating through the rest of the system. So to conclude altogether what we propose, next slide, and that will be the final slide of the presentation. What we want to do is not just a Slovenian double victory in Tour de France. It could be also a Slovenian three bridges in one solution, which says that we should extend the focus, as I've said already before, and that is going to be the extension from first response to the resilience cycle, that we should integrate all together, and that should be the main line of the bridge, safety and security aspects, which are very often still separated in many practical situations, and that we should go for call it full integration of situational awareness, resilience analysis management, and also integration between critical infrastructure and critical functions, because that is what is probably going to yield a solution acceptable and useful for everybody. There we are always trying to say to all participants, and also to say to the Commission, that networking only is not the solution. We have to work together on solutions, but this is difficult in a Europe as it is today. We cannot agree about much more trivial things than complex threats. But optimists, I think, are sitting today around this table, and are, if not by all, at least by the chairperson, I see by his smile, are shared. So we remain optimists, and we remain hardworking on this issue, and we are looking for working forward with ICS and all our colleagues around the table in the future too. Many thanks, and I'm of course open for the questions now or later, as Dennis says. Thank you.
Alexander, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. And of course, this last thought was really crucial. And I hope that with this presentation, we have some focus how to get out of the jungle. So thank you very much for your presentation. And I would like you to ask you to stay with us and to answer some question in the chat rubric, where is 2 or 3 questions to your presentation. Thank you very much, and we will proceed with our next speaker.